The sound of chains rattling echoed through the silent courtroom as I stood frozen, my gaze locked with his. The world seemed to slow down as 150 pairs of eyes turned to stare, their faces a blur except for Marcus's. My brother's arrogant smirk transformed into something unrecognizable as I spoke those words that exposed the truth. 40 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. He's a criminal. The fluorescent lights seemed to intensify their glare, burning into my retinas as I watched my brother's carefully constructed facade crumble in real time. The hushed whispers of the courtroom distorted in my ears, replaced by the thundering of my own heartbeat and the collective gasp rippling through the gallery. "That's not possible," Marcus whispered, his voice hollow with shock. The metal handcuffs clinked against the wooden defendant's table as his hands trembled. $5,000 custom-tailored suit he'd made sure to mention when he strutted into the courtroom earlier. I had waited 7 years for this moment. My name is Olivia. I'm 36 and a federal district judge. This is the story of how I reclaimed my dignity from the brother who spent a lifetime trying to erase it. The federal courthouse's imposing chamber had never felt so heavy with tension. Dark mahogany panels, the solemn seal of justice, and enough collective anxiety concentrated in one room to suffocate the strongest of souls. I'd arrived 30 minutes early, entering through the judge's private entrance to prepare myself mentally for what was about to unfold. The bailiff had given me a concerned look when I requested that my name be temporarily withheld from the docket until the proceedings began. I hadn't planned on being the one to sentence Marcus. For years, I'd navigated my career meticulously to avoid any potential conflicts with his increasingly questionable business dealings. I'd built my reputation on fairness and impartiality while he built his empire on deception and exploitation. Somehow, in his mind, only one of us deserved respect, and it wasn't the sister who'd chosen public service over profit. I found myself taking deep, measured breaths in my chambers when my clerk appeared with the final case files. "Judge Parker, are you certain you want to proceed with this? Given the circumstances, no one would question if you recused yourself." His tone suggested he believed I should. "The defendant is my brother Thomas, not my responsibility," I replied, straightening my robe. "And justice doesn't recognize family ties." Despite our strained relationship, Marcus had always kept tabs on me, if only to ensure I remained in what he considered my proper place, beneath his shadow. My brother had mastered the art of diminishing others to elevate himself, and I'd been his primary target since childhood. Our parents' enabling of his behavior had only reinforced his sense of entitlement. The bailiff's voice interrupted my thoughts. "All rise!" The Honorable Judge Olivia Parker presiding. The familiar words took on new weight as I entered the courtroom, my eyes deliberately avoiding the defendant's table. I took my seat and gestured for everyone to be seated, maintaining the composed demeanor I'd perfected over a decade on the bench. Case number 2025, County Route 7384, United States versus Marcus Parker, on charges of wire fraud, money laundering, securities fraud, and racketeering, my clerk announced. The silence that followed was deafening. I finally allowed myself to look directly at my brother, whose expression shifted from confusion to recognition to fury in the span of seconds. "Your Honor," his attorney began, clearly flustered, "there appears to be some mistake. We were expecting Judge Harrington to preside over this case. Judge Harrington has been reassigned." This case was randomly reassigned according to standard protocol. Quote, "I stated, which was technically true. What I didn't mention was that I could have declined it but chose not to. Sometimes justice required uncomfortable choices. Does the defense wish to request a continuance?" Marcus leaned over to whisper urgently to his attorney, who shook his head in response before addressing the court again. "No, Your Honor. We're prepared to proceed." I nodded. "Very well. The record will reflect that I am Judge Olivia Parker. For transparency, I will note that the defendant is my brother. However, as this relationship has been estranged for several years, and after careful consideration of judicial ethics guidelines, I have determined that recusal is not mandatory in this instance." I paused, scanning the courtroom. If either counsel objects to this determination, now is the time to voice those concerns. The prosecutor stood. The government has no objection, Your Honor. Marcus's attorney hesitated, clearly calculating the risks. A request for recusal might delay proceedings, but challenging a judge, especially one with my reputation for fairness, could backfire spectacularly. No objection, Your Honor, he finally said, though the reluctance in his voice was evident. I proceeded with the initial formalities, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions beneath my judicial calm. 7 years ago, at our mother's 65th birthday celebration, Marcus had introduced me to his business associates as my little sister, who plays pretend in a courtroom somewhere. When corrected that I was actually a federal judge, he'd laughed it off. Oh, she handles parking tickets and small claims, nothing important. The memory still stung. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The trial progressed with methodical precision. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of Marcus's elaborate financial schemes that had defrauded hundreds of investors out of their life savings, elderly couples who lost their retirement funds, single parents who invested their children's college savings, working-class families who believed Marcus's promises of financial security, only to lose everything. Throughout the proceedings, I maintained absolute neutrality, ruling on objections with strict adherence to the law regardless of which side benefited. If anything, I found myself being extra cautious with the prosecution, holding them to the highest standard of evidence to ensure no appellate court could later find any hint of bias in my handling of the case. Marcus, for his part, maintained his characteristic arrogance. His testimony was a masterclass in deflection and charm, the same tactics he'd employed throughout our childhood to escape consequences for his actions. When our parents' antique vase was broken, it was my fault for distracting him. When he crashed our father's car, it was because Olivia made me upset earlier. A lifetime of blame shifting had served him well in business but proved less effective under oath. Mr. Parker, the prosecutor asked during cross-examination, are you suggesting that you were unaware that transferring investor funds to your personal accounts was illegal? I'm suggesting, Marcus replied with practiced confidence, that in high-level finance, the movement of capital follows complex patterns that lay people, and, forgive me, most legal professionals, simply don't understand. His eyes flicked toward me briefly, a subtle reminder of the countless times he'd dismissed my career as trivial compared to his real work in the financial sector. I recalled a particularly painful Thanksgiving dinner 3 years ago, when he'd announced to our extended family, Olivia gets to play with a little wooden hammer, while I move millions through global markets. Guess which one of us actually impacts the world? Our parents had laughed appreciatively while I sat in silence, choosing dignity over confrontation. My cousin Sarah, a public defender, had squeezed my hand under the table in silent solidarity. As the trial continued, text messages from our parents arrived with increasing frequency. Be fair to your brother. Remember, family comes first. Marcus has always supported you. That last one nearly made me laugh out loud. The revisionist history my family had constructed around my brother's behavior was as elaborate as his Ponzi schemes. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury returned with their verdict, guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in hushed conversations as I scheduled the sentencing hearing for the following month. Your Honor, Marcus's attorney approached the bench. Given the unusual circumstances, would the court consider expediting the sentencing process? Translation. They were hoping for leniency and wanted to capitalize on any lingering familial loyalty before I had time to process the implications fully. The court will follow standard procedure, counsel. I replied evenly. Sentencing will occur after the probation office completes its pre-sentencing report. During the weeks that followed, I immersed myself in case precedents, sentencing guidelines, and victim impact statements. My chambers became a fortress of legal research as I prepared to issue a sentence that would withstand both public scrutiny and my own conscience. The pressure was immense, but so was my commitment to justice. The day before sentencing, my mother called. Olivia, please, he's your brother. You can't do this to him. I'm not doing anything to him, Mom. His actions brought him here. But you have the power to help him. A lighter sentence, maybe house arrest instead of prison. Something. I closed my eyes. feeling the familiar weight of familial expectation. That's not how this works. The law doesn't bend for family connections. It's not about bending the law, she insisted. It's about showing mercy to your own blood. Like the mercy he showed his victims, or the respect he's shown me throughout my career. The words escaped before I could stop them. There was a long pause. Is that what this is about? You're punishing Marcus for hurting your feelings? The suggestion was so absurd, so dismissive of my professional integrity, that I couldn't formulate an immediate response. "Goodbye, Mom," I finally said, ending the call. That night, I barely slept, not from doubt about what I needed to do, but from the weight of knowing that upholding justice would likely sever what remained of my family ties. By morning, I had made peace with that reality. Some prices were worth paying. The sentencing hearing began promptly at 9 a.m. The courtroom was packed with victims, media, and curious observers. Marcus sat at the defendant's table, impeccably dressed despite weeks in pretrial detention. Our parents occupied the front row directly behind him, their expressions a mixture of worry and silent pleading when they caught my eye. One by one, victims approached the podium to share how Marcus's fraud had devastated their lives. A retired teacher described selling her home to cover medical bills after losing her savings. A widower explained how he now worked 2 jobs at age 72 to support his grandchildren, after the college fund he'd established with his late wife vanished. A young woman tearfully recounted postponing cancer treatment because the investment she'd counted on for medical expenses turned out to be worthless. Throughout these testimonies, Marcus maintained a practiced expression of remorse that didn't reach his eyes. I had seen this look before, at family gatherings when he was forced to apologize for some transgression but felt no genuine contrition. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he approached the podium with the confident stride that had served him well in boardrooms and charity galas. "Your Honor," he began, then paused deliberately. "Olivia, we may have had our differences." "You will address the court properly, Mr. Parker," I interrupted, my voice firm. He adjusted his tie. "Your Honor, I stand before you not just as a defendant, but as someone who recognizes his mistakes. Were there financial improprieties? Yes. Did I sometimes blur ethical lines in pursuit of ambitious returns? Perhaps. But I never intended harm." I watched him weave his narrative with the same persuasive skill he'd employed throughout our lives. The story of Marcus Parker, misunderstood visionary, whose only crime was dreaming too big and reaching too far. It was compelling, carefully crafted, and entirely self-serving. "Your Honor, I've dedicated my life to creating wealth, not just for myself, but for others. My methods may have been unorthodox, but my intentions were always to succeed, to excel, to rise above mediocrity." His eyes met mine briefly, a pointed reminder of his frequent comparisons between us. I asked the court for leniency, for the opportunity to make amends, to rebuild what was lost. After he concluded, his attorney made impassioned arguments for a minimal sentence, citing Marcus's previously clean record, his contributions to charitable causes, funded, as the evidence showed, largely with stolen money, and his genuine remorse. The prosecutor countered with a recommendation for the maximum sentence permitted under the guidelines, emphasizing the calculated nature of the fraud. Finally, it was time for my ruling. The courtroom fell silent as I prepared to speak. I could feel the weight of every eye upon me, particularly Marcus's. For a moment, I was transported back to childhood dinners, where he would interrupt my stories, family gatherings where he would diminish my achievements, the countless times he had made me feel invisible in my own life. But this wasn't about our personal history. It was about justice, about consequences, about the hundreds of lives irreparably damaged by his actions. I took a deep breath and began. The court has considered the pre-sentencing report, the government's recommendation, the defense's arguments, and the deeply moving victim impact statements presented today. The evidence in this case reveals not a momentary lapse in judgment but a years-long scheme of calculated deception, targeting vulnerable individuals who placed their trust, and their financial security in the defendant's hands. I continued, methodically addressing each factor that influenced my decision. The scope of the fraud, the devastating impact on victims, the complete absence of mitigating circumstances. Throughout my statement, Marcus's expression shifted from confidence to disbelief to barely contained rage. "Mr. Parker," I concluded, "your actions reflect a profound moral failure and a callous disregard for the welfare of others. The court sentences you to 40 years in federal prison, to be followed by 5 years of supervised release. You are ordered to pay restitution in the full amount of $175, $432,819 to the victims of your crimes." The sentence, at the upper limit of the guidelines, sent ripples of reaction through the courtroom. Victims embraced each other, some weeping with relief. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks. My parents sat in stunned silence. And Marcus stared at me with naked hatred. "That's not possible," he whispered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "The sentence has been imposed, Mr. Parker," I stated firmly. "You have the right to appeal within 14 days. As the bailiffs approached to take him into custody, Marcus's composure finally shattered. "This is about revenge, isn't it?" he shouted. "Because I told people the truth, that you're nobody, that your career is a joke compared to mine." The outburst caused a stir in the courtroom, but I remained perfectly still, a technique I'd perfected during difficult proceedings. Absolute calm communicates more than defensive reactions ever could. "For the record," I said evenly, "the defendant's outburst demonstrates precisely the kind of entitlement and lack of accountability that led to these crimes. The sentence stands." As they led Marcus away, our eyes met one final time. In that moment, I saw something I'd never witnessed in my brother before. The recognition that his narrative, the story he'd constructed about his own importance and my insignificance, had finally irrevocably crumbled. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. "Judge Parker, did your relationship with the defendant influence your sentencing decision? Was it difficult to sentence your own brother? Do you feel your judgment was clouded by personal history?" I paused on the courthouse steps, considering my response carefully. Justice must be blind, even when family ties are involved. The sentence today reflects the severity of the crimes committed, nothing more and nothing less. Every person who enters my courtroom receives the same fair treatment under the law, regardless of their surname. That evening, alone in my home office, surrounded by law books and case files, I poured myself a glass of wine and allowed the emotions of the day to finally surface. There was no satisfaction in what had transpired, only the somber knowledge that I had fulfilled my oath to uphold justice, even at great personal cost. My phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from family members expressing everything from outrage to disbelief. I ignored them all. Tomorrow, I would return to my courtroom, to other cases that required my full attention and impartial judgment. Tonight, I sat with the weight of what it truly means to serve justice without fear or favor. 3 months later, I learned that my parents had hired a high-profile appellate attorney to challenge Marcus's sentence, citing judicial bias. The appeal was swiftly rejected, with the appellate court specifically noting the meticulous care with which I had handled every aspect of the trial. My judicial review that year included commendations for integrity under extraordinary circumstances. I received no congratulations from my family, and I expected none. Some relationships, once fractured by truth, cannot be repaired, nor should they be. In the years that followed, I established a foundation to support financial literacy education and assistance for victims of white-collar crime. Not as atonement, I had nothing to atone for, but as a commitment to ensuring that power and privilege could not shield anyone from accountability, not even those we once called family. The gavel I used today was a gift from one of Marcus's victims, an elderly craftsman who carved it from oak with the words, "Equal Justice," etched into the handle. It reminds me daily that true strength isn't found in wealth or status or family connections, but in the courage to stand firmly for what's right, even when you stand alone. Life behind bars wasn't what I'd expected. The relentless rhythm of prison routines had become my new normal, The metallic clang of cell doors, the monotonous drone of fluorescent lights, the ever-present stench of industrial disinfectant that never quite masked the underlying odors of too many bodies confined in too little space. My first year of a 4-decade sentence had passed with excruciating slowness, each day bleeding into the next with cruel similarity. The prison library, with its dated collection and flickering lights, had become my sanctuary. Today, as I flipped through a dog-eared copy of The Count of Monte Cristo, the irony wasn't lost on me. Like Edmond Dantes, I too harbored thoughts of vengeance that kept me warm during cold nights in my cell. Unlike Dantes, however, my imprisonment was entirely of my own making, though I still couldn't bring myself to accept that truth. "Parker!" A guard's voice cut through my literary escape. "You've got a visitor!" I looked up, surprised. My parents had stopped visiting 3 months ago when I refused to sign the papers, authorizing yet another appeal. My former business associates had disappeared the moment handcuffs touched my wrists. Who would bother to see me now? The visitor's room was half empty today. I scanned the tables until my eyes landed on her. Olivia. My sister. My judge. She sat ramrod straight in her civilian clothes, a simple blue blouse and dark slacks, looking somehow both out of place and completely at ease. 7 years of estrangement, 1 explosive trial, and 14 months of imprisonment stood between us. Marcus. She acknowledged me with a small nod as I took the seat across from her. "Your Honor," I replied, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? Come to see your handiwork up close?" She didn't flinch. The Olivia I remembered from childhood would have. That girl had been sensitive, easily wounded by my casual cruelty. This woman before me was someone else entirely, someone I had failed to recognize until it was too late. "I came because it's time we talked," she said simply. Really talked. Without lawyers, without family, without courtroom protocols. I leaned back, crossing my arms defensively. 14 months into a 40-year sentence seems like an odd time to start caring about communication. I've always cared about communication, Marcus. You were just never interested in listening. She placed her hands flat on the table between us, and I noticed she wore no jewelry. Not even a watch. She'd followed prison visitation protocols to the letter. Always the rule follower. "So talk," I said, gesturing expansively around the bleak visitation room. "I clearly have nowhere else to be." Olivia studied me for a long moment, her eyes, so like our mother's, searching my face for something. "I didn't come to lecture you, or to gloat. I came because of something one of your victims said to me last week." "My victims?" I scoffed. "You mean my investors who got cold feet when the market turned?" She continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Mrs. Eleanor Simmons. Do you remember her?" The name stirred something in my memory. An elderly widow, carefully dressed in outdated clothes, who had entrusted me with her late husband's life insurance payout, $340,000. A small account by my standards, but she'd been so pathetically grateful for my attention. "Eleanor approached me after a speaking engagement at the State Bar Association," Olivia continued. "She asked me if I hated you for what you did, not just to her and the others, but to me." I shifted uncomfortably. "And what did the Honorable Judge Parker say to that?" I told her the truth, that hate requires emotional investment I'm no longer willing to make where you're concerned. Olivia's voice remained measured, clinical almost. But her question made me realize something. You and I have never actually discussed what happened between us. Not the fraud case, our estrangement. The years before that. I laughed sharply. "You want to have a heart-to-heart now? After sending me to prison until I'm an old man?" "I didn't send you to prison, Marcus. Your actions did." She leaned forward slightly. "But yes, I want to understand something I've never been able to figure out. Why did you spend so much energy diminishing me? What did you gain by telling everyone I was a nobody?" Quote, the directness of her question caught me off guard. In the courtroom, she had been scrupulously professional, never once alluding to our personal history. Now, sitting across from me in this dismal room with its bolted-down furniture and watchful guards, she wanted to dissect our dysfunctional relationship. "You've got it backwards, as usual," I said, falling back on old habits of deflection. "I didn't diminish you. You chose a career path that simply wasn't as impressive as mine. That's not my fault." "A federal judgeship isn't impressive?" Her eyebrow arched slightly. "Playing referee for other people's disputes? No, not compared to building something, creating wealth." The words felt hollow even as I spoke them, echoes of a reality that no longer existed. "You created nothing, Marcus. You moved money from one pocket to another until there was nothing left." She didn't say it cruelly, just stated it as the fact it was. "But that's not what I'm asking. Even before your business career, even when we were children, you seemed determined to ensure I remained invisible." Memories surfaced unbidden. Olivia at 10, proudly showing our parents her perfect report card only for me to spill juice on it, accidentally. Olivia at 16, winning a statewide essay contest that I dismissed as remedial writing for public school kids. Olivia at 22, graduating law school with honors while I told extended family she'd finally found something she could manage. "Is it?" She seemed genuinely curious rather than accusatory. "Do you remember my law school graduation?" I shifted in my seat. Vaguely. It was 15 years ago? 14. Mom and Dad flew out to Boston. You showed up late, left early, and spent the entire dinner talking about your new convertible and the model you were dating. So? Not everyone finds law school graduations riveting entertainment. It wasn't about the ceremony, Marcus. It was the pattern. Every milestone in my life you found a way to minimize it or overshadow it. She tilted her head slightly. "The question is why?" I stared at her, suddenly annoyed by her calm analysis. Even now, she was treating this like some academic exercise, some case study in sibling rivalry. "Maybe because you were always so damn perfect," I snapped. "The responsible one. The serious one. Parents. Little prodigy who never put a foot wrong." Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps. "Is that really how you saw me? Perfect?" "Of course it is. Olivia the brilliant. Olivia the dedicated. Olivia who never needed reminding to do her homework or clean her room or call Grandma on her birthday." The words came faster now, fueled by resentments I'd never acknowledged even to myself. "Do you have any idea what it's like growing up with St. Olivia as your benchmark?" She was silent for a long moment. "I never knew you felt that way." "How could you not know? Mom and Dad were always comparing us. Why can't you be more like your sister, Marcus? Olivia would never have gotten a C in algebra. Look how responsible Olivia is with her money." I mimicked our mother's disapproving tone. "They compared us to each other?" Genuine confusion crossed her face. "That's not what I remember at all." "Of course you don't remember. You were the golden child." I was the disappointment. Olivia shook her head slowly. "Marcus, they adored you. Always. You were charismatic, popular, athletic. Everything I wasn't. Dad bragged about you constantly. Dad criticized everything I did. Because he thought you could do anything. His expectations for you were sky high because he believed in your potential." She leaned forward. "Do you know what he said when I told him I'd been appointed to the federal bench? That's nice, honey. Did you hear Marcus just closed that deal with European investors?" I stared at her, trying to reconcile her version of our childhood with my own memories. Had we grown up in the same house? With the same parents? "This is absurd," I finally said. "You're trying to rewrite history to make yourself the victim." "I'm not claiming victimhood, Marcus. I'm trying to understand why we became so estranged that you felt the need to erase my actual accomplishments from the narrative of your life." Her voice remained steady. "Why tell people I was a clerk when you knew I was a judge? What purpose did that serve?" Quote. The question hung between us, deceptively simple yet impossible to answer honestly without revealing too much of myself. The truth was both petty and profound. Her success on her own terms had been a rebuke to my own choices. Every ethical stance she took, every principled decision, every sacrifice for the greater good, had implicitly highlighted the corners I cut, the rules I bent, the people I used. It made for a better story. I finally said, the admission smaller than the truth, but still more honest than I'd been in years. The brilliant financier and his insignificant sister. More dramatic contrast. She nodded slowly, a narrative where you were the only protagonist. Something like that. And now? She asked quietly. What's the narrative now? I gestured to my prison uniform. Isn't it obvious? You won. The righteous sister triumphs over her corrupt brother. Justice prevails. Roll credits. That's not how I see it. No, you're out there collecting accolades for your integrity while I rot in here. Seems pretty clear-cut to me. Olivia sighed, a sound so weary it momentarily stripped away her judicial composure. This was never a competition, Marcus. That's what you never understood. Your downfall doesn't constitute my victory. Save the platitudes for your next commencement speech, Olivia. We both know you're enjoying this. Do we? She met my gaze directly. Have I ever struck you as someone who takes pleasure in others' suffering? The question gave me pause. Despite our estrangement, despite my attempts to diminish her, had Olivia ever actually retaliated? Had she ever been anything but meticulously fair, even when I was at my most dismissive? Why are you really here? I asked instead of answering. Because we're still family, she said simply. And because I think you deserve to know that Mom and Dad have been asking to see me. This was unexpected. They haven't mentioned that during their visits. They haven't seen me yet. I wanted to talk to you first. How considerate, I said sarcastically. Getting my permission to reconcile with our parents? Not permission, just transparency. She straightened a bit in her chair. They reached out after the appellate court upheld your sentence. I think they've finally accepted that there won't be a magical legal solution. The reminder of my failed appeal stung. And now they want to make amends with you? How convenient. I don't know what they want exactly, but I do know this. Whatever relationship I may or may not rebuild with them, it won't be at your expense. I snorted in disbelief. The noble Judge Parker. Always taking the high road. Not always, she said quietly. I could have recused myself from your case. Probably should have. The admission surprised me. Then why didn't you? Because I needed to prove something, not to you, but to myself. She looked down at her hands briefly before meeting my eyes again. I needed to know I could be completely fair, even to someone who had never been fair to me. The vulnerability in her admission caught me off guard. For the first time in our adult lives, Olivia was showing me a glimpse of her internal struggle rather than the polished, professional facade she presented to the world. And were you? Fair? I couldn't help asking. The appellate court seems to think so. A small, sad smile crossed her face. But I'll spend the rest of my career wondering if another judge might have sentenced you differently. We sat in silence for a moment, the ambient noise of the visitation room. Murmured conversations, occasional laughter, a child crying at a nearby table, filling the space between us. I didn't come here to reopen old wounds, Olivia finally said. I came because Eleanor Simmons also told me something else. She said that despite everything, she prays for you. How touching, I replied, but the sarcasm felt forced. She said she prays not just for your redemption, but for your peace. Olivia reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. She asked me to give you this. She slid the note across the table. I hesitated before picking it up, half expecting some biblical quotation about sin and punishment. Instead, in careful handwriting, I read, Mr. Parker, I have chosen to forgive you, not because you deserve forgiveness, but because I deserve peace. Perhaps someday you'll find both as well. Eleanor Simmons. Something tightened in my chest. Not quite remorse, but its distant cousin. For the first time since my sentencing, I felt a hairline fracture in the wall of self-justification I'd built around myself. Why would she? I began, then stopped, unsure how to finish the question. Because forgiveness isn't about excusing actions, it's about refusing to let those actions determine the forgiver's future, Olivia said. Eleanor chose to move forward. She's rebuilding her life, working part-time at a local library, taking in a roommate to share expenses, finding joy despite what she lost. The concrete reality of Eleanor's adaptation to the circumstances I had created hit harder than any abstract notion of victims. This wasn't just a name in a court document or a faceless member of a defrauded class. This was a widow in her 70s, forced to take a job and a stranger into her home because of my actions. I didn't. I trailed off again. Think about the real people, Olivia supplied. I know. That was always the difference between us, Marcus. I never forgot that behind every case file was a human life, while you never saw past the dollar signs. The assessment was brutal in its accuracy. I wanted to protest, to defend myself with the same practiced arguments I'd deployed throughout my trial. But sitting across from my sister, the person who had known me longest in the world, those defenses felt hollow. Is that why you became a judge? I asked instead. The human element? She considered the question seriously. Partly. I became a lawyer because I believed in the potential of law to balance scales that life had tipped unfairly. I became a judge because I realized that potential depends entirely on who interprets and applies those laws. For the first time, I found myself genuinely curious about my sister's career path, about the convictions that had shaped her choices. And do you balance the scales? I try, she said simply. Every day I try. Another silence fell between us, less tense than before. The guard announced that visiting hours would end in 15 minutes. Will you come again? The question escaped before I could consider its implications, that I might actually want my sister's company, that this conversation, uncomfortable as it was, represented the most honest interaction I'd had since my incarceration began. Olivia looked mildly surprised. Would you like me to? Pride warred with loneliness, and for once, loneliness won. I wouldn't object. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. High praise indeed from Marcus Parker. Don't get used to it, I replied, but there was no real bite to the words. She stood, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her slacks. I'll come next month. Same day. I nodded, suddenly uncertain how to end this unexpected détente. Olivia, I said as she turned to leave. That woman, Eleanor, is she really okay? My sister paused, studying me with a slight tilt of her head. She's finding her way, one day at a time. She hesitated, then added, That's all any of us can do, really. As she walked away, I remained seated, turning Eleanor's note over in my hands, one day at a time. In the context of a 40-year sentence, those words should have been meaningless, even cruel. Instead, they offered a framework I had never considered. That redemption, like corruption, might be an incremental process. Back in my cell that night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying our conversation. For years, I had cast Olivia as a minor character in the story of my life, the dull, plodding sister whose conventional choices highlighted my own brilliance. Now I was forced to consider that perhaps I had been the supporting character all along in a narrative I hadn't bothered to understand. The realization wasn't exactly humbling. 40 years of narcissism doesn't dissolve in a single visitation, but it was disorienting. Like discovering the map I'd been following had north and south reversed. 3 weeks later, a package arrived for me, a book from the outside, cleared by prison security. The Courage to be Disliked, the title read. Inside, on the title page, a brief inscription in my sister's precise handwriting. The story isn't over yet. Oh, I began reading that night, not out of any expectation that a self-help book could undo the mess I'd made of my life, but because it was the first time in our adult lives that Olivia had offered me anything resembling guidance. The fact that she believed there might be something in me worth salvaging was novel enough to command my attention. By the time her next visit came around, I had read the book twice and requested others like it from the prison library. I had also, in a moment of either clarity or madness, signed up for the prison's restorative justice program, a series of sessions where offenders confronted the impact of their crimes. You look different, Olivia observed as she took her seat across from me. Prison will do that. I deflected automatically. That's not what I mean. She studied me with the same careful attention she likely gave witnesses in her courtroom. You seem more present. I shrugged, uncomfortable with her scrutiny. Thanks for the book. Did it help? It gave me something to think about, besides how much I hate the food here. She smiled slightly. Progress. We fell into conversation that was still awkward but less combative than before. She told me about a complex environmental case she was presiding over. I mentioned the community college courses I was considering enrolling in through the prison's education program. Neither of us mentioned our parents until the end of the visit. They're coming to dinner next week, Olivia said as she prepared to leave. Mom and Dad. I nodded, unsure what response she was looking for. I'll tell them you're doing as well as can be expected, she continued. Unless there's something specific you'd like me to say. I thought about it for a moment. Tell them. I hesitated, then decided on honesty. Tell them I'm trying to understand what happened. Not just legally, but... I gestured vaguely. Personally, she supplied. Morally. Something like that. Olivia nodded. I'll tell them. She hesitated, then added. They miss you, you know, despite everything. They have a funny way of showing it. They haven't visited in months. I think they're ashamed, she said quietly, not just of what you did, but of their part in it, the way they enabled your worst tendencies while dismissing your better ones. The assessment was surprisingly insightful, and made me wonder what other observations my sister had kept to herself over the years. When did you get so wise? I asked, only half joking. Around the same time you started noticing, she replied with unexpected humor. As she left, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time, the tentative stirrings of respect for someone other than myself. My sister was neither the insignificant footnote I'd dismissed, nor the avenging angel my resentment had painted her to be. She was simply Olivia, complex, principled, and far more forgiving than I deserved. In the months that followed, our visits became a regular fixture in my prison routine. Once a month, Olivia would arrive with a new book, insights from her work, carefully anonymized to protect confidentiality, and occasionally, news from our parents, who had begun a cautious reconciliation with her. Slowly, painfully, I began the process of honest self-examination, not the performative remorse I'd displayed during my trial, but the genuine reckoning that comes with accepting responsibility. I volunteered for the prison literacy program, teaching fellow inmates to read. I wrote letters of apology to former clients, expecting nothing in return. Most never replied. A few sent back hate mail, but Eleanor Simmons, the widow whose forgiveness had started this unlikely journey, sent a simple card with a pressed flower inside. Growth is possible anywhere, she had written, even in the harshest conditions. I kept that card pinned to the wall of my cell, a reminder that while I couldn't undo the damage I had done, I could choose a different path forward, one day at a time, as Olivia had said. One choice at a time. 3 years into my sentence, during one of our monthly visits, Olivia arrived looking more serious than usual. What's wrong? I asked immediately. Nothing's wrong, she replied. But I need to tell you something important. I've been offered a nomination to the Court of Appeals. That's good, right? A promotion? She nodded. It's a significant step, but it would mean moving to Washington. My visits would become less frequent. The news hit harder than I expected. These monthly conversations had become an anchor in the monotony of prison life, a connection to the world outside, and a reminder that redemption, however partial, was still possible. You should take it, I said, meaning it despite my disappointment. You've earned it. Olivia studied me carefully. Thank you. That means something, coming from you. Don't let it go to your head, I replied with a ghost of my old sarcasm. I'm not exactly a character reference you'd want to use. She smiled slightly. Maybe not professionally, but personally. She paused. You're still my brother, Marcus. That hasn't changed. Even after everything? Especially after everything. She reached across the table and briefly touched my hand, the first physical contact between us in years. We don't choose family, but we can choose how we relate to them. I'm choosing to believe in your capacity for change. The simple declaration of faith, not in who I had been, but in who I might yet become, felt weightier than any sentence she had pronounced from the bench. As she prepared to leave, I found myself saying something I had never said to her before, something my pride had always prevented. I'm proud of you, Olivia. I should have said that years ago. The surprise in her eyes was quickly replaced by something warmer. Better late than never, she replied softly. Same goes for becoming the man I always knew you could be. As I watched her walk away, I realized that while justice had required my imprisonment, perhaps redemption required something else entirely. The courage to rewrite the narrative of my life, not by erasing my failures or diminishing others, but by finally acknowledging the truth in all its complicated, humbling reality. My name is Marcus. I'm a federal prisoner with 37 years left on my sentence. This is the story of how I lost everything I thought mattered, only to discover what actually does. 5 years into my sentence, I received unexpected news. The warden called me to his office, a rare occurrence that usually signaled either catastrophic personal news or administrative problems. I walked through the prison corridors with a guard at my side, mentally preparing for whatever awaited me. Parker, the warden said as I entered, his expression unreadable. Take a seat. I complied, noticing a manila folder on his desk stamped with official seals I didn't recognize. I've received a request from the Department of Justice, he began, tapping the folder. They're forming a task force to investigate financial crimes similar to yours. They're particularly interested in certain overseas entities that were tangentially connected to your case. My pulse quickened. I had carefully shielded certain business associates during my trial, maintaining a code of silence even when it hurt my own defense. Some habits died hard. What does this have to do with me? I asked carefully. The warden leaned back in his chair. They believe you have information that could help them track down billions in hidden assets. They're offering a deal. What kind of deal? Sentence reduction. Significant reduction if your information leads to successful prosecutions and asset recovery. I stared at him, processing the implications. A chance at freedom years, possibly decades, earlier than expected. A chance to rebuild some semblance of a life before old age claimed me. There's more, the warden continued. The lead prosecutor on this task force specifically requested you. He paused, watching my reaction. It's your sister. The news hit me like a physical blow. Olivia? But she's a judge, not a prosecutor. Not anymore. Judge Parker stepped down from the bench 8 months ago to head this specialized financial crimes unit. Given her background in both judiciary and her familiarity with complex financial fraud cases. He trailed off, letting me connect the dots. 8 months, the timing aligned with her last visit, when she'd mentioned a, quote, career change, but had been vague about details. I had assumed she'd taken the appeals court position she'd been offered years earlier. Why would she want my help? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. That's between you and her. The warden stood. She'll be here tomorrow morning to discuss the terms personally. I suggest you think carefully about what you're willing to share. That night, I paced my cell, sleep impossible as my mind raced through possibilities. Olivia had visited regularly for 5 years. Our relationship gradually evolving from tense standoffs to something resembling actual siblinghood. She had witnessed my halting attempts at redemption, the education courses, the therapy sessions, the letters to victims. But she had never once suggested using my insider knowledge to catch others who had escaped justice. Was this genuine opportunity or some elaborate test? And more importantly, was I willing to betray former associates to reduce my own sentence? The next morning, Olivia waited in a private conference room rather than the usual visitation area. She wore a tailored pantsuit and carried a leather portfolio, the prosecutor's uniform rather than a judge's robes, but commanding similar respect. Marcus. She greeted me with the same calm demeanor I'd grown accustomed to over the years. Prosecutor Parker now, is it? I took the seat across from her. You didn't mention that career change during your last visit. It wasn't finalized then, and it wasn't relevant to our personal relationship. But it's relevant now, She nodded, opening her portfolio. I'm heading a specialized task force focusing on international financial fraud networks. We believe several major players who were connected to your operations have continued and expanded their activities. And you want me to help you catch them? It wasn't a question. Yes. She looked me directly in the eye. Your cooperation could shorten your sentence substantially. Depending on the value of your information and your willingness to testify if necessary, we're talking about a reduction of 15 to 20 years. 20 years. The number hung in the air between us. I could be out before I turned 60, with time enough to build something new. Why me? I asked. And why you? There must be conflicts of interest concerns. As for why you had connections we haven't been able to penetrate otherwise. Your overseas partners were careful. They're still operating, still victimizing people. She paused. As for why me, I recused myself from any involvement in your specific case review. My focus is on the broader network, not on renegotiating your personal sentence. That will be handled by others. I studied my sister, noting the subtle changes 5 years had wrought, the confident set of her shoulders, the purposeful intensity in her gaze. Whatever this new role was, it suited her. You left the bench for this, I observed. Why? Judges don't typically step down to become prosecutors. Something flickered across her face, passion perhaps, or conviction, because sitting in judgment wasn't enough anymore. I wanted to be part of dismantling the systems that enable these crimes in the first place. Systems I helped build, I said quietly. Yes. She didn't soften the truth, and now you have a chance to help tear them down. I leaned back, weighing my options. The selfish calculation was simple: trade information for freedom. But there was another dimension to consider, one that 5 years of reflection had finally made visible to me. What did I owe to those I had harmed? Not just my direct victims, but everyone affected by the corrupt financial ecosystem I had helped sustain? If I do this, I said slowly, I want something beyond sentence reduction. Olivia raised an eyebrow. What did you have in mind? Education programs for fraud victims. Real financial literacy initiatives, not just warnings about scams. And victim restitution has to be the priority. Assets recovered go to them first, before government coffers. My sister looked momentarily surprised, then thoughtful. That's actually already part of our approach. The task force includes a victim advocacy division. We're developing community education components as well. I want to help design them, I pressed. When I get out, use what I know to help people protect themselves. Now she looked genuinely startled. You want to work in victim advocacy? After release? Is that so hard to believe? 5 years ago? Yes. Now. She studied me with the careful assessment I'd come to recognize. Not as her judicial scrutiny, but as her way of seeing beyond surface appearances. Now, perhaps not. We spent the next 3 hours discussing specifics. What information I had, which entities were of particular interest, how the process would work. Throughout, I found myself sharing insights I had carefully guarded for years, not just to secure my own freedom, but because it felt like the right thing to do. As our meeting concluded, Olivia gathered her notes. We'll start formal interviews next week. A team will be assigned. I nodded, then asked the question that had been nagging at me. Did you take this job knowing you'd come after me for information? She paused, considering her answer carefully. I took this job because I believe in the work. But yes, I knew your cooperation could be valuable. She met my gaze directly. I also believed you were ready to make different choices. How could you possibly know that? Because I've been watching you change for 5 years, Marcus. Small choices, day after day, that add up to something significant. She closed her portfolio. People can surprise you, if you pay attention long enough. The formal cooperation process began the following week. I met with prosecutors, financial analysts, and international law enforcement liaisons, unspooling the complex web of relationships and transactions I had carefully constructed over decades. Names were named, bank accounts identified, shell companies exposed. With each disclosure, I felt a peculiar mix of disloyalty to former associates and loyalty to something larger, perhaps justice, perhaps merely the truth. Olivia kept her distance during these sessions, maintaining professional boundaries while the process unfolded. But she sent books, not self-help titles anymore, but works on economic justice, ethical business practices, and systemic reform, silent guidance for the path ahead. 8 months into the cooperation agreement, the first major arrests occurred. 3 former associates, men who had dined in my home, vacationed on my yacht, trusted my discretion, were taken into custody across 2 continents. Their arrests led to others, a cascade of indictments that sent shockwaves through certain exclusive circles. I watched the news coverage from the prison library, recognizing faces I had once called friends. There was no satisfaction in their downfall, only a somber recognition of collective failure, the shared moral compromises that had seemed so justifiable in pursuit of wealth. A year after our initial meeting, Olivia visited me privately again. "The Sentencing Review Board has made its decision," she said without preamble. "Based on your cooperation and the results it has yielded, they're recommending a reduction of 18 years. 18 years! The number seemed both enormous and insufficient. A fifth of a lifetime granted back, but still a significant portion lost. "When?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "You'll be eligible for release in 22 months, with good behavior. Less than 2 years. After 6 years of imprisonment, freedom suddenly had a tangible timeline. There's more," Olivia continued. "Eleanor Simmons has requested to meet with you." I stared at her. "Eleanor? The widow? Why would she want to see me now?" "She's been following the case developments. She knows you've been cooperating." Olivia hesitated. "She's also become involved with our victim advocacy programs. She's been speaking to senior groups about financial fraud protection." The image of Eleanor, who must now be approaching 80, standing before groups of her peers, sharing her painful experience to help others, created a tightness in my throat I couldn't explain. "Will you see her?" Olivia asked. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Eleanor's visit occurred 2 weeks later. She entered the visitation room slowly, leaning on a cane, her white hair neatly styled and her clothes simple but dignified. She looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile, but her eyes were clear and direct as they found mine. "Mr. Parker?" she said, as she carefully lowered herself into the chair opposite me. "Mrs. Simmons, thank you for coming." The words felt inadequate, ridiculous even. She studied me for a long moment. "You look different than I remember." "Prison changes a person," I offered. "No." She shook her head slightly. "Prison walls don't change anyone. It's what happens inside a person that matters." She placed her weathered hands on the table. "Your sister tells me you've been helping catch others like you." "I've been cooperating with investigators, yes." "Why?" The directness of her question caught me off guard. I had prepared explanations about sentence reduction, about legal strategies. But under Eleanor's steady gaze, those justifications evaporated. "Because it's the right thing to do," I said simply. "Too late, but still right." She nodded, as if I'd confirmed something she already suspected. "I didn't come here for an apology, Mr. Parker. I wouldn't presume to offer one. What I did to you, to everyone, isn't something words can address." "No, they can't." She reached into her purse and withdrew a photograph, placing it carefully on the table between us. "This was my husband, Thomas. 43 years together before cancer took him. The insurance money you took was his final gift to me." I forced myself to look at the photograph. A smiling older man with kind eyes and Eleanor by his side, both of them looking at each other rather than the camera. "He worked for the Postal Service for 38 years, Eleanor continued. "Never missed a day, saved carefully, planned for us to travel after retirement." Her voice remained steady, matter of fact rather than accusatory. "We got 3 years of that dream before he got sick." Each detail added weight to what I had stolen. Not just money but dreams, memories that would never be created. Security earned through decades of diligent work. "I didn't know," I said quietly, though it was no excuse. I hadn't wanted to know. That's why I'm here, Mr. Parker. Not for apologies, but so you would know. So you would see Thomas and understand what your choices cost. She tapped the photograph gently. Behind every account number was a person, a life, a story. We sat in silence for a moment, the photograph between us like evidence at a trial. Your sister mentioned you might be involved in educational programs after your release, Eleanor finally said. Teaching people to protect themselves from men like you were. If they'll have me, I replied. Though I imagine my credibility is questionable at best. On the contrary. A hint of a smile touched her lips. Who better to explain how these schemes work than someone who created them? The poacher turned gamekeeper. Is that why you're involved in the advocacy work? To prevent others from experiencing what you did? She nodded. At my age, purpose is precious. This gives meaning to what happened. Not justification. Nothing could justify it, but meaning. Her words struck a chord. Purpose. Meaning. Concepts that had been entirely absent from my calculating pursuit of wealth and status. I still have the note you sent me, I told her, about forgiveness being for your peace, not my absolution. And have you found any peace, Mr. Parker, in all this? Her question seemed genuinely curious rather than judgmental. Not peace, I admitted, but perhaps direction. A path forward that isn't just about minimizing my own sentence. She nodded as if this made perfect sense. That's a start. When visiting hours ended, Eleanor rose carefully, declining my instinctive offer of assistance. At the door, she turned back. When you do this education work, if you do it, remember Thomas's face. Remember that real people trust financial advisors with their hopes, not just their money. She held my gaze. That responsibility is sacred. You violated it once. Don't ever do so again. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was something perhaps more valuable. A challenge to become worthy of trust again, even if that trust would never be hers to give. The remaining months of my sentence passed with increasing purpose. I worked with investigators, testified in depositions, and began drafting materials for what would eventually become the Financial Predator Playbook, an insider's guide to recognizing and avoiding investment fraud. Olivia visited monthly, our conversations evolving from case specifics to broader discussions about economic justice and systemic reform. Sometimes she brought news of our parents, our father's declining health, our mother's reluctant acceptance of my cooperation with authorities. They want to see you when you're released, she told me during one such visit. They've sold the house in Connecticut, downsized to a condo in Florida. The family estate? Gone? I tried to imagine our imposing colonial home, the setting for so many lavish parties and uncomfortable family dynamics, belonging to strangers. Dad's medical bills took most of their savings, Olivia explained. What your legal defense didn't drain, that is. The news was sobering. While I'd been imprisoned, life had continued its relentless forward motion. Parents aged, homes changed hands. Nothing remained static. Will you be there? I asked. When I'm released? Do you want me to be? The question gave me pause. 6 years ago, I would have recoiled at the thought of my sister witnessing my exit from prison, one final humiliation in our lifelong competition. Now the prospect of facing that transition alone seemed far worse. Yes, I admitted. I'd like that. On a crisp autumn morning, 20 months after our initial task force meeting, I walked through the prison gates a free man. Olivia waited beside her car, her expression a careful mixture of professional distance and personal concern. Ready? She asked simply. I nodded, adjusting to the absence of walls and fences, the openness of the horizon. Where to first? Transitional housing is arranged. Then meeting with your parole officer. She opened the passenger door. One step at a time. The following months unfolded in a careful choreography of legal requirements and gradual reintegration. Parole meetings. Therapy sessions. Job training programs. The world had changed during my incarceration. Technology had advanced, political landscapes had shifted, social norms had evolved. I stayed in a halfway house initially, then a modest apartment secured with Olivia's assistance. My assets remained frozen or forfeited, my former wealth as inaccessible as if it had been a dream. 6 months after my release, the DOJ's Victim Advocacy Division offered me a position as a consultant on their education initiative. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, the fraudster teaching others how to avoid fraud, but my insider knowledge proved valuable in ways textbook expertise could not match. I began speaking at community centers, senior residences, and financial literacy workshops. At first, audiences were skeptical, sometimes hostile. "Why should we trust anything you say?" was a common challenge. "You shouldn't," became my standard reply. "Verify everything, question everything." That's exactly the point. Gradually, the program expanded. The Financial Predator Playbook became a curriculum taught in community colleges. Victim testimony, including Eleanor's, was incorporated alongside technical information about red flags and reporting mechanisms. A year after my release, Olivia invited me to dinner at her home, a modern apartment in a renovated industrial building downtown. It was the first time I'd seen where she lived, this private space she had created for herself. "You've done good work with the program," she said as we shared a meal she had cooked. Another revelation: my accomplished sister also made excellent lasagna. "The feedback has been positive." "It's the least I can do," I replied, uncomfortable with praise for what felt like obligatory amends. "Take the win, Marcus," she said mildly. "Acknowledge progress when it happens." I looked around her apartment. The bookshelves filled with eclectic titles, the framed photography on the walls, the comfortable furniture that invited relaxation rather than showcasing status. It struck me that I had never really known my sister as an individual, separate from our family dynamic and my own distorted perceptions. "I never asked about your life," I realized aloud. All these years, our conversations were about me, my case, my future. I never asked about yours. She raised an eyebrow. "Noticing that is progress too. So tell me now, are you seeing anyone? Happy with the career change? Any regrets about leaving the bench?" Olivia considered the questions thoughtfully. "I've been dating someone for about 8 months. An environmental engineer. It's going well." She smiled slightly. "The career change has been challenging but fulfilling. I miss the clarity of the courtroom sometimes, but prosecution allows for more creative problem solving." "And us?" I ventured. "Any regrets about getting involved in my case?" She was quiet for a moment. "No regrets. But it hasn't been easy. Balancing professional ethics with family loyalty, separating the person from their actions." She met my gaze directly. "I'm proud of the work you're doing now. That doesn't erase the past, but it matters." Her measured approval meant more than I expected. Not the adulation I had once craved from everyone around me, but honest recognition of genuine effort. 2 years after my release, Eleanor Simmons passed away peacefully in her sleep. I learned of her death through the Victim Advocacy Network, where she had remained active until her final months. At her memorial service, I stood at the back, unsure of my place among those who had genuinely known and loved her. A collage of photographs near the entrance included images of Eleanor speaking at fraud prevention workshops, her expression animated as she shared her hard-won wisdom. "She mentioned you, you know." A voice beside me made me turn. A middle-aged woman with Eleanor's eyes studied me curiously. "In her final weeks, she said the man who took everything from her ended up giving something back to others." "She was remarkably generous in her perspective," I replied. "Not generous." Clear-eyed. The woman, Eleanor's daughter, I presumed, shook her head. "Mom didn't believe in fairy tales or happy endings. She believed in usefulness. She thought you had made yourself useful." Useful. Not redeemed, not forgiven. Useful. It was a practical assessment that suited Eleanor perfectly. After the service, I visited Thomas's grave, where Eleanor would soon join him. I stood silently for a long moment, remembering the photograph she had shown me years before, the tangible evidence of lives affected by my choices. "I remember his face," I said quietly to the headstone. "I tell others about him. Not by name, but his story. It matters. 3 years to the day after my release, I received an unexpected phone call. A law firm representing a group of my former victims had a proposal. They had tracked the task force's progress and noted my involvement in both the prosecutions and the education initiatives. Some of your victims have expressed interest in a different kind of justice, the attorney explained. A series of direct conversations with you. Not for legal purposes, those matters are settled, but for personal closure. Restorative justice on a voluntary basis. No reduction in financial penalties, no legal advantage to be gained. Just the hard, necessary work of facing those I had harmed and listening to their stories. I agreed immediately. The sessions were among the most difficult experiences of my life. Harder than prison, harder than testimony. Each victim had distinct questions, unique losses, particular pain that required me to truly see them as individuals rather than abstract investors. Some wanted to understand the mechanics of how they'd been deceived. Others needed to express their anger directly. A few sought insight into what kind of person could inflict such harm on strangers. I answered honestly, accepting their emotions without defensiveness. It was exhausting, humbling work, the antithesis of the glib charm I had once deployed to separate these same people from their money. 5 years after my release, I published a book, not a self-aggrandizing memoir, but a detailed account of how financial predators operate and how regulatory systems fail to protect ordinary investors. Proceeds went to victim restitution funds and fraud prevention programs. Olivia helped edit the manuscript, her legal precision complementing my insider knowledge. Our collaboration marked a new chapter in our relationship, colleagues as well as siblings, each with distinct expertise but shared purpose. At the book launch, a small event at an independent bookstore, I spotted our parents in the back row. They had aged considerably, my father now using a wheelchair, my mother's hair completely white. But they had come, despite the complicated emotions my public rehabilitation must evoke for them. After the reading, they approached cautiously. "We're proud of you," my mother said, reaching for my hand. "This new direction." My father nodded in agreement. "Using what you know to help others. That takes courage." Their approval, once so desperately sought and then bitterly dismissed, now felt like just one element in a much larger mosaic of accountability and purpose. Later that evening, Olivia and I shared a quiet dinner at a nearby restaurant. "They meant it, you know," she said, "about being proud." I know. I contemplated my water glass. It matters less than it once did. Growth, she observed with a small smile. Or perspective. I looked at my sister across the table. This woman I had once seen as competition, then as adversary, now as ally. "Thank you for not giving up on the possibility that I could change." "That's what justice is supposed to be about," she replied. "Not just punishment, but transformation." She raised her glass. "To second acts. They're rare enough to be worth celebrating." I clinked my glass against hers, thinking of all the unlikely turns that had led us here, from courtroom confrontation to collaborative purpose, from bitter estrangement to genuine connection. My name is Marcus. I'm 53 years old and 7 years into my second chance. This is the story of how justice becomes redemption when we finally face the truth about ourselves, and how even the most painful consequences can lead to unexpected purpose if we have the courage to learn from them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.